Oh wow, what a clickbait title. Hello, Internet. Welcome to Life Theory, I guess. It's time for that shit I mentioned a while back. So, socialism, is it evil? Probably not. In fact, I'll take the scandalous approach and say that it is both inevitable and the only way we're going to not all die. If you haven't gone brain dead already from the radiation of my takes, you're probably saying, hey, Satin, that sounds kinda crazy. To which I'd say, at least watch to the end of the fucking video. This thing is coming to you in 3 parts covering my terrifying view of the future, so strap in, cause things are going to get a lot worse.
Your feelings changed like the weather. Went from pretty rain, all that time of day. How can I go on with a cup all in a palm? Love's so hard to find when someone's on your mind.
Part 1. Oh no, not automation. According to a 2017 Oxford study, there will be job losses of up to 47% over the next 50 years in the US. By at least 2026, 1.4 million jobs in the US will vanish. The robots are coming for your jobs, people. This shit isn't going away. And we aren't doing much about it because, truthfully, it doesn't seem like there is much we can do, at least not within this system. Yet still, the problem continues, unstoppable, like the White Walkers. Or at least like the White Walkers are supposed to be. I mean, Jesus Christ, David and Dad, what are you? I mean, Jesus Christ, there's a fucking site called willrobotstakemyjob.com. Are you fucking serious? This is already a problem. Everyone has their own theories as to why Donald Trump won the election, and I'm not so stupid as to chalk it up to one single thing, but if I had to say what had the biggest impact, it would be white working class men who didn't know where their jobs were disappearing to. Unfortunately for the capitalist class, Trump, like a lot of people before him, had an answer for those men, and it wasn't the capitalist capital. By the way, I would like to stress that very important point. That would serve to create wealth for the ruling class of capitalist nations to build the same thing that destroys your job. That being said, it may not be the case that all the proletariat will be homeless bums in the next half century. The reality might be much worse. This article from the Technology Review compiled a bunch of studies on automation and job loss, and the most striking thing about the article is how varied the numbers on how much is actually going to be lost are. One thing pretty much everyone agrees on is that there is a crisis and it will become worse. So how do we get to a situation that's even worse than most of the working class being out of a job? Well, to explain, I'll have to address the most common criticism and fears of the automation crisis, that being, lol, we got past the Industrial Revolution just fine, what's the difference now? First of all, we didn't get past the Industrial Revolution just fine. The gap between the rich and the poor massively grew as capitalists used their capital to hoard more and more wealth. Anyone remember the Gilded Age, the 1920s, child labor? That disparity is echoed in the inequality we see today. According to Adair Turner from CNBC, the inequality now is literally so bad, the most recent period we have to which to compare it to is the 1920s. Luckily, back then, trade unions and social democratic reforms pushed by many Marxist activists at the time helped roll back on the massive inequality, but now that we're back in this situation, people are starting to think that just these things may not be enough. Capitalists, of course, won't let the proletariat just live without any money at all. They need people to buy their stuff, and so the same thing that happened during the Industrial Revolution will probably happen again. Capitalists will use their capital to force the proletariat into the menial labor jobs remaining, using the same work-or-die mentality as always, leading to even less opportunities for social advancement. Coordination and social perceptiveness will also be valued skills in the future, meaning that autistic people like myself will face even more discrimination in the job market. In brief, if you aren't one of the ones with the robots, you're fucked. This isn't rhetorical either. Christian Siegel from the University of Kent School of Economics determined that the polarization of the job market has been a problem since the 1950s, meaning that job growth exists mainly in the higher and lower ends of the pay scale. This, of course, will lead to massive discontent, as it did in the past. Anti-capitalist uprisings in varying forms swept the industrialized world in the century following the Industrial Revolution. In fact, it was specifically in response to the conditions of the revolution that the theories of socialism and communism were born. So now, perhaps it is time for a new revolution. Part 2. In his essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, the massively important economist John Maynard Keynes estimated that, given the rapid increases in the capabilities of automation, by the end of the 20th century, workers would need work no longer than 15 hours a week. He was wrong. According to the Centre for Economics and Business Research in the UK, the same place Keynes was from, The average UK worker today is 84% more productive in office-based sectors of the economy than in 1970. For our purposes, an entire workday in 1970 can be completed in an hour and a half. An hour and a half. Yet still we work 8 hours a day. Why? The faulty assumption Keynes made, which is a mistake of many social democrats, is that capitalists will willingly cede their power to their workers because it's fair or something. In reality, even the 40-hour workweek is only achieved through the tireless work of leftist activists, not because that was a natural trajectory for the economy. In other words, self-determination of work needs to be taken, one way or the other. And it will take a bit for people to take it, but they will. And even in places I think where people might not expect it. There are some small things that have set socialists up for success. With the end of the Cold War, there is no longer a Soviet boogeyman to scare some of us away from socialism and justify violence against the braver among us. And with Bernie Sanders having made the word socialism mainstream, and even in many circles a good word, Americans will need a lot less convincing to take on actual socialist policies. Possibly even more important, Americans at this point have no interest in eradicating socialism or even so-called communism from the world. Even the US's current conflict with Venezuela has little to do with the socialist and capitalist dynamic. That means that for once, libertarian socialist experiments around the world can start to take hold. And then it will be a lot clearer that, hey, maybe the socialism stuff is something every country should take up, maybe? I don't know. Let's just say I'm really looking forward to the 2022 British elections. The mainstreaming of socialism doesn't mean that we'll necessarily win, however. Two important events that will occur in the future will cause that. And since we spoke about the first one at length, let's just skip to the end result of the problem of automation. It all comes down to this. In a socialist economy, automation is a blessing, not a curse. The massively growing inequality that will likely occur as a result of automation will create growing unrest. And in that unrest, socialists will be there to make their case. If workers control the means of production, once automation comes along and can produce the same amount of goods in the same amount of time with less time investment by humans, instead of keeping the hours the same and firing the people you don't need, so what tends to happen in a capitalist economy, everyone could just vote to work less. That way, instead of the 40-hour work week, we can have a 35-hour work week, a 25-hour work week, a 15-hour work week. And the reality is that something else will exacerbate this problem even further. Since humanity seems to have decided to ignore the apocalypse, at least until it starts horrifically and indisputably biting us in the ass, it appears that the rise of automation will coincide with the rise of climate change. Soon, we will have millions of homeless refugees, not only in our own countries, but from other countries as well. And finding solutions for people who've collectively had billions, probably trillions of dollars erased through catastrophe, the likes of which have never been seen before, will be difficult. Especially if they're coming in the middle of an automation crisis. Ignoring the problem won't be possible then. At that point, we will need a set of radical solutions. And what more apt a solution than to use the same automation that's getting rid of our jobs to usher in a post-scarcity economy and make it so that everyone's needs can be taken care of. But of course, private interests wouldn't want that, so there's only one way to make that solution a reality. Part 3. Problems. There is another way this could go. Another anti-capitalist ideology may also arise in response to such tensions. I'm sure with all of my talk of economic crisis and refugees that a few red flags were set off in your heads about it. There's a really good possibility that in the developed world, instead of an immediate surge in socialism, we may see, in many or even most cases, a surge in fascist regimes. Or at least for a while. Take a look through the Wikipedia page for the list of fascist movements by country. No, seriously, I'll wait. Okay, done it. Good. Notice how all of them are incredibly short-lived. It doesn't matter what sector you're looking at, the regimes almost always end in disaster. My theory is that fascism can't survive very long, because the ideology is, at its core, incredibly unstable. In order to keep the energy needed to keep the ruling class in power, the fascist movement requires increasingly insular tactics, which results in extremely narcissistic wars against other countries they oftentimes can't win, alienating a significant amount, if not most, of their populace, or both. Now, I know that considering I'm arguing for the eventual dominance of libertarian socialist societies, the argument of multiple short-lived projects may not seem to hold up. But the difference is that fascist experiments fail mainly because they attack others, whereas socialist experiments fail mainly because they get attacked. In the case of a socialist revolution needed to fix imminent problems, a wave like the one that I'm describing would make it so that socialist experiments can thrive more than they could before, especially since certain countries don't seem as interested in crushing socialist experiments as a primary objective as they once were. And with the rise of candidates like Trump and Bernie, it seems that the US is firmly heading, at least rhetorically, in a more anti-interventionist direction. So yeah, we might have to deal with many fascist uprising, and that sucks, but I'll take heart in the idea that they may not be very long lasting, especially since they likely won't fix the problems they will claim to want to fix anyway. There's another problem, and it concerns the capitalist class. You see, in the face of all the problems I mentioned, the capitalists, rather than allow a peaceful working class revolution to happen, may push for more extreme methods of suppressing the rapidly growing discontentment with capitalism. And as those methods become, almost by necessity, more extreme and violent, so too do we edge closer to the breaking point, wherein the legitimacy of the state's monopoly in violence is rejected, and a violent revolution occurs. Full disclosure, I do not want this to happen. Violent revolution sucks, but you know, it may happen, and it's important to reckon with this. So yeah, that's my theory. Of course, it's really hard to predict what will happen in the future, so take everything I said with a grain of salt. But I think the idea that all these stresses in capitalism that we're feeling now, and will feel even harder in the future, will cause the status quo to collapse is kind of borne out by a lot of what we're observing now geopolitically on an international scale, whether it's a refugee crisis, or the rise of white nationalism, or whatever. It's still important to fight. I don't think it's a certainty that the left will win, but at least now I hope that you don't understand why I'm hopeful for the future.